Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 237. I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast today by Stuart Britton, who's the sports scientist at Ascot United. Stuart, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Ben. Yourself?
I'm good, thank you, mate. I realise that you have just rushed in, put the computer on and jumped straight onto a call. So I'm going to give you a second just to sort of settle, compose yourself. No, but I really appreciate you coming on, mate. I think there's going to be some pretty applicable things that we'll cover in this episode for a lot of people working at a lot of different clubs. I've just mentioned your role at Ascot, which we'll get into in a little bit, but just give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure. So really my sort of background as an athlete, actually nothing to do with football. I was a very big martial artist, so I was really into my taekwondo, judo, jiu-jitsu, that kind of stuff. Did a little bit of sort of rowing and rugby at school, and then eventually found my way into coaching through taekwondo at uni. After that, it's typical thing. If you finish your undergrad, you're trying to find a job. Doesn't always work out too well, so you go and do a master's, and then you try and get some work alongside it. I was fortunate enough to go and work with Notts County for that season. And then that was just cut short by the pandemic, which then means you're sort of scrambling to find another alternative. And really that, I had a lot of time on my hands. Let's go and have a look at non-league. Let's go see what I can bring to the table there. Got involved with 1874 Northwich, who were sort of like my local club. They were very on board, very much like, why have you sort of dropped down to this level in a way? Not that I saw it that way, but and then eventually ended up getting a full-time role in healthcare, so ended up moving down south. Still wanted to keep up the coaching stuff. Ended up with Ascot. That's since I've been with them about 2 seasons now, and that's since led to joining the Wales men's lacrosse team as their strength and conditioning coach too. So it's something that if you asked me 5 years ago where you'd end up, I wouldn't have planned this, but here we are, having a great time with it.
Brilliant, mate. Just give us a little bit of context around Ascot, because I'm sure there's going to be a few listeners thinking, what's league are they in? What step are they at? So give us a little bit of context around the league and the setup there first.
Sure. So it's the same, and actually it was the same when I joined Northwich as well. They were both in step 5 of the National League system. So I think it's about the 10th tier of the total pyramid. So very much non-league, very much part-time athletes. Most of the players have got full-time jobs, families, other commitments and things. We've got a couple of players who it might have been, they were at an academy when they were younger, got released, never quite found their way back, so they're now playing non-league. You've got some guys who've just spent their whole career in non-league and very sort of old-school centre-back type players, if you like. And it's a great club to work with. We've had a fantastic season so far. The goal when I first joined was always, let's try and get promoted. Happy to say we've actually done that. So we're going to be moving up to step 4. Hit 102 points as well, which there's not many teams have since during seasons. This season as well, we're in the semi-final of the League Cup. So hopefully that's another final for us. And we've actually made it to the FA Vars final for the first time in the club's history. So that's everyone's sort of very excited for that and very much looking forward to that big game at Wembley.
Brilliant, mate. That's so good to hear. And it's good to see the progress that the club's making. Obviously, a great opportunity for yourself. We've had a lot of people on the podcast before working in non-league. I say a lot. We've had a good amount of practitioners working in non-league, and we spoke about the benefits before. But where do you feel that lies for you in your career in terms of benefits of working with players that are essentially part-time?
Yeah, I think it presents a massive opportunity for developing as a practitioner. It's very much throwing yourself in the deep end, getting your hands dirty from day one and picking up as much experience as you can. So particularly for, guys who might still be at uni or who are not sure what kind of club or what kind of role they want to go into, get involved straight away. You can't necessarily rely on other people at that point. So if I've got a programming issue or an injury that I'm not sure how I'm going to work with, you've got to go and do that research yourself. You've got to go and learn. You're going to make mistakes along the way. That's to be expected.
Yeah.
But ultimately, a lot of these non-league clubs are very grateful just to have someone on board to help carry some of that weight. The season before I joined, the guy doing the injury rehab was basically just another coach. He didn't have a background in S&C, really good at coaching youth footballers, but ultimately that was one of the big things that when I came in, we had a physio join at the same time, and our day one plan was, right, let's actually try and get an established rehab pathway in. So day one play comes in injured. Okay, let's go through the treatment. Let's go through any manual therapies. Let's get you back on the pitch and try to get you back into playing. And in fact, one of my first experiences at the club was dealing with the club captain who had an MCL tear, I think it was. Can't remember if it was grade 1 or 2. And then all of a sudden it's like, right, let's try and get him back playing. And, fortunately we did it in about 5-6 months, didn't require surgery. And later that season, he went on to captain the club in the Berks and Bucks County Cup semi-final against Wickham. Scored the winning penalty for it as well. So that poster's now hung up in the changing room and hung up in the dressing room. And it's huge memories for these players that I think, at a lot of non-league clubs, you haven't got those kind of support or that sort of opportunity. So actually, from a practitioner point of view, it's a massive opportunity for development if you want to go and pursue it. And I think you certainly learn a lot from doing it by throwing yourself in at that deep end.
You sort of touched on it a little bit in terms of the rehab being taken by a coach before you arrived. But what did the rest of the program look like? Because I want to get into in a little bit some of the additions that you've made, maybe some of the successes. Obviously, the whole success this season was strictly down to sports science support. That's right, isn't it?
Always.
But
definitely not our manager awake at 2 a.m. playing out.
No, nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. No, in all seriousness, we'll get into the details in a little bit. But what did it look like before you stepped into that role?
I'd say there probably wasn't too much of a program, in all honesty. Most of your players would go through the pre-season. You'd have a couple of sort of late joiners or late transfers or registrations partway through the season, and they're just trying to get up to speed through training. One of your biggest challenges of working in non-league is, and we bang on it about it in every level of football, is this fixture scheduling and fixture congestion and things. In non-league, you might start with a game every Saturday, training on a Tuesday and a Thursday. The season goes on, games get postponed, you end up playing a game on Tuesday, training Thursday, game on Saturday. You then get to the tail end of the season, like we've had for the past couple of weeks, where you've got a game on Tuesday, game on Thursday, game on Saturday. And we're one of the fortunate clubs. There's a few I've heard of who've had something like 10 games to play across 21 days, and you just think it's mental. So very much you haven't got a huge amount of contact time with the players. So what you've got to try and do, I think, is either give them give them the tools that they can go away and look after themselves and come to each game ready to compete and perform. Equally, it's trying to, for example, to give you an example, if we jumped into training on a Thursday, usually you've got half an hour or so you might be working with them. You do your physical warm-up, you do your activation, and then it's looking at trying to build some of this almost fundamental movement skills that never quite developed. So it might be a lot of stuff we've worked on is change of direction. And a lot of players experience things like groin injuries because they're not used to that many movements and they're not used to training that kind of thing. And actually, suddenly you introduce them to a Copenhagen and all of them like, oh, hang on a minute, I can't walk the next day. So really, it's a lot of stuff like the high speed exposure they're getting in matches anyway. So you almost don't want to overload them unless they're brand new coming into the system. Our manager's a big fan of Murderball, so often it's actually just trying to keep players on their feet at the end of that. It's very much, you haven't got a huge amount of time, so you've got to try and prioritize those key little movements and try and just develop their overall athleticism. Fortunately, when I joined, one of the first things we were trying to bring in was using GPS monitoring, which is now starting to get there in non-league. There's a few individual players might have it, but there's a few more clubs now we're getting it. And obviously, I can draw my experience from being at Notts County, where they've used Catapult, and they've got everything they need. They've got dedicated practitioners and analysts. You go to non-league, and then that's you. So you've really got to prove that value. You've got to say, right, okay, what does this player's game look like? What does this player's top speed? And you almost build out a profile from what you can measure. Which, of course, when you bring that back into your rehab context, you've then actually got some almost key performance indicators that you want that player to hit before you know that actually they are ready to compete. They're back at full fitness.
It's teaching a hell of a lot in terms of priority, though, isn't it? Because you don't have the time, because you don't have the resources, it's teaching you as a practitioner to go, right, there's all these skills in this toolbox that I've got available to me. But like you mentioned with the change direction work and the groin work, there's certain decisions that are going to have to be made to go, these have to be the priorities in this situation as well, isn't it? Because you just mentioned the injury history of the team. Mm-hmm. So that comes into play. What other factors come in for you to decide that in terms of those priorities?
I think one of the big ones as well is actually just being cognizant of the fact if they've played on a Saturday, played on a Tuesday, Thursday, they're probably going to be quite sore. And as well as that, if they're coming into a game on a Tuesday, they've likely been sat down at work all day. So actually, it's not always a case of let's try and develop your athleticism. Let's actually just try and loosen things off, go through some activation, go through some stretching, and just try and get that movement quality back.
Yeah.
And equally, you look at other little bits and pieces of your recovery in that time space is quite short. And most non-league players will probably enjoy a drink on a Saturday night, and credit to them, they've earned it. But then it's thinking that, right, are you then compromising your recovery? Is there anything we can then look to, you want to try and hit your key pillars of sleep, hydration, nutrition. And a lot of those factors are out of your control. So the best you can almost do is just give them that education, check in on them, see how they're getting on, and offer support where you can. And often, like I said, it's often just getting those basics right. It's not looking for all the fancy tech. It's not looking for all the fancy training bits, because you don't often have access to them. So actually, if you can just bring in those key pillars and get the basics right, that would take you 80-90% of the way, I think.
So when I spoke to practitioners in the Football League before, and they start complaining about how many games that they're playing and the training load and everything, and then we've now got Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday with murder ball and players going out on the weekend with hardly any sleep and little hydration.
Funny you mentioned it. At one of your networking events, someone said, "Oh, so what do you do for a periodization model?" And I went, "You're joking, right? You're trying to have a periodization model when you're barely training."
It's true though, isn't it? But this is the reality of working with players in non-league, but it gives such a good I just think it develops practitioners massively, doesn't it? Because then when you do step into environments that are different and different challenges, you've got these experiences to draw back on, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I look at it is, if I can run a full session with some cones, some bibs, and a stopwatch, give me all your force plates, give me a full gym, we're laughing. We'll have a great time. It's almost learning to make do with what you've got, and then you can always add extra to it. But you've got to hit the basics of the coaching first and get that hands-on experience.
What was your approach to it going in? Because obviously the players haven't been used to any sort of support in terms of sports science beforehand, like you mentioned. So when you're starting to apply this, what has been the reception from the players?
I'd say in the first instance, probably a little bit mixed. And I think you've got some patterns that you'll see across lots of clubs. So a lot of your veteran players who've sort of gone, I've always done it this way. This has always worked for me. I'm not too keen. Fair enough. And you've got some guy in the mid-20s coming in saying, right, we're going to do all this, and you've been playing football for 20 years. You're not always going to listen to them. I can accept that. I can respect that. A lot of the guys who've been around academy settings seem to be very keen on it, because they've clearly experienced the benefits of it. They've done it before, so they're quite familiar and quite receptive to it. And then you've got a few of those players in the middle who are undecided and they kind of want to see a bit more from you. So really the first thing I went about it was actually just try and get to know the squad, get to know their background, see what are those players like, who am I working with exactly. And then actually, once you start working with some of the senior players and you can convince them and show them what your worth is, that buy-in generally filters through the squad, I think. You start to get a little bit more of, oh no, yeah, we're doing things properly at this club. And any prospective signing comes in, it's like, look, we've got an all-weather pitch, we've got GPS units, we record every game, and we've got access to like huddles analysis. We're trying to do things properly, despite the fact we've got limited resources in a way.
It's something that I don't know if you've listened to the episodes with Damien Hughes, but he refers to cultural architects in terms of in the squads, people that can have an impact on other people, whether that be through action and maybe doing something that they've not done before and everyone taking note, or whether that be through like a captain trying to lead and push a new protocol or method of training onto people. And I think essentially that's what you've talked about there, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was interesting because when I sort of first joined, speaking to the coach I worked under at Notts, a guy called Eric Svensson, and he basically said, look, every football squad has got the same personality, isn't it? So as soon as you can work out which player is like a player you've worked with before, you're laughing. It's easy at that point.
Yeah.
You learn those sort of how to communicate with certain players. You know when to push them, when to leave them alone. And ultimately, I mean, it's their decision at the end of the day. If they see other people are buying into the sports science and progressing past them, their competitive edge will kick in. They'll suddenly come looking to you for any help they can get.
Yeah, And that's when you know you're onto a bit of a win with it, isn't it? When they do start seeking out and asking questions, I think that's always a good sign. In terms of that education, because you said before, you have to somewhat empower players to go away and look after themselves in terms of hydration, nutrition, where maybe strength training, recovery, and everything that they're going to be doing away from the club. How do you go about that? Do you make them just accessible to you, or are you doing any sort of presentation to them? What does that look like?
Mostly looks like a very. I've always said I'm a very open door coach. I want people to come and speak to me. I'll go and speak to you, and you pick up almost a bit of a sense of looking at certain players and going, actually, you seem like you're a little bit tired, or you seem like something's bothering you. And actually, just open up the questions and yeah, everything all right? Yeah, busy time at work. And as soon as you start to get to know them as a person, it's a little bit easier to then work out what they might be missing or what they might need.
Yeah.
Possibly, again, this is something where actually, since I've joined the Wales lacrosse setup, it's something that we've looked at as well. Under their sort of tournament blocks, I guess, you might be at a tournament for 7 days, 8 days, and you might have 5 games in that space. You might have a 2-week tournament, you've got 7, 8, 9 games in that space, and your recovery becomes really important. From the minute that game finishes, you've got to start looking forward to the next one. In that case, that was a lot of presentations because you've got athletes all over the place, so you have to go through things like Zoom or use the monthly check and say, right, here's what we're looking at. Let's try and create an athlete dashboard. Give us your responses there. How are you feeling? Try and check in with players on a one-to-one basis. Ascot has very much been, and it helps that we've got a great physio as well. He will always sort of talk players through the injury, talk them through what he thinks they need to do, and then he'll say, right, go and speak to Stu. He'll sort you out. He'll tell you what to do next. And it's, like I said from the beginning, it's building up that pathway where actually the players can see that if I do get injured or I do come back unfit, I know how to get back to this first team.
Yeah, no, definitely. We touched on some of the additions that you've made to the program. What do you think has been the most successful so far?
I think actually just bringing a sense of professionalism to it has made a huge difference. It's quite easy, I think, to see non-league as a lot of fun and just, obviously we want to push for promotion. If we get a good winning streak, great, we'll go on it. But trying to do things the right way has a massive effect on player recruitment, player retention, and credit to the manager. He's created a squad here who are very much enjoying what they're doing. It's a great atmosphere around the club, and actually everyone's bought in. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. On a sort of more personal note, I love using the GPS side of it, even if some of the players won't thank me for it, because actually it gives us that data-driven approach. It means we can actually make decisions based on what a player's game looks like. It makes programming a lot easier for them because you know what sort of metrics they're capable of. And I've had a couple of players in the build-up to the final have said, well, actually, I've got 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get in the best shape of my life because I want to be in that starting lineup. Can we have a chat about that? And you start to build up a program of, okay, here's what you can do in the recovery between or following the last couple of games of the season. Here's what we're going to do on those off season to maintain a little bit of strength and power work in the gym. Here's what we're going to do, and here's the speeds I want you hitting in the running, just in case we haven't got a training session for whatever reason or there's other stuff gets in the way. And it's piecing together all those little basics that actually are going to work for them.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that buy-in's really important, isn't it? And regardless of facilities and the sort of equipment that you have available, that comes down to that buy-in from the player, that they're obviously wanting to progress, aren't they? And they're wanting to utilize what you've got available to you.
Yeah, and it's like we said before, there's a lot of non-league clubs where your physio will just be another coach who happens to have a first aid kit. By doing things the right way, the players will buy into it straight away because they trust that actually you're there to look after them. Even if they don't thank me during pre-season running, but I am there to do it in their interests. It's a great club, and it's been a great the last 2 years have been great for us, really, and we're now starting to see the benefits of all that sort of hard work and the professional approach to it.
I know, speaking with a lot of other coaches in non-league, whether it was been on the podcast or elsewhere, that there's a lot of great innovative ideas, approaches that coaches make in this similar sort of scenario, because they might not have the funds available to fund certain bits of kit or whatever it is, or even staff members, and they're utilizing things amazingly. And here are some great ideas. Is there anything that springs out from you, Stuart, in terms of innovation?
I'd say possibly, well, the one I keep sort of coming back to is that data-driven approach, and just trying to give you that sense of accountability. It's very easy then to turn around to a player and say, well, everyone else has won their GPS vest. Did you always get lost between the dressing room and the pitch? Sure. I think, yeah, I wouldn't have said there's anything too innovative short of just tightening up a few loose screws. I think it's, now our warm-ups are they're very structured. They're very sort of, right, you've got 10 minutes to do this. We've got 5 minutes to do this. We're into this. It's tightening everything up a little bit more just so that everything flows smoothly, everything works coherently. I think there's not really anything too innovative, I would have said. It's just getting the basics right and keep doing them.
And what about moving into next season? Because obviously the club going up, hopefully, fingers crossed, polishing off the cup final and all the rest of it, but then moving into a new season. As a practitioner, from your perspective, what are you looking at thinking we could change that for next season or we could progress that?
I think so far we've sort of proved this season that we could compete at the step 4 level. I think we've definitely got the talent in the squad to be able to do that. And I'm conscious of the fact that at times we have relied on a few players. So, for example, our first choice striker has played about 49 games this season, I think. He's scored 45, 46 goals. And at times you've looked at him and gone, yeah, you need a break, but also you've scored 2 goals. So it's hard to challenge that decision. I think to an extent we're trying to still, again, we're going to maybe see a bit of a shift where actually we can take the conditioning a little bit more seriously. We can try and get a bit more group recovery. And personally, I'd love to get a little bit more contact time with players if possible, even if it's a case of a couple of them come down a little bit early before training or after training. The reserve or the players who aren't around the squad so far, just keep topping up that conditioning, keep topping up that work so that actually we can afford to rotate the players and not worry about sharpness, not worry about fitness or players making mistakes. You've got such a high turnover of players in non-league that you have to work very quickly to sort of build that rapport and get a player up to speed, and then try and convince them to hang around, which, fortunately, when you're having a successful season, it's quite easy to get them to stick around. But yeah, it's those sort of little bits and pieces. I'd love to bring in just a little bit more strength work, tidy up a little bit of the gym stuff, because we haven't actually got a gym on site at the minute. So again, if we can just sort of take not control, but tighten up a few things that are doing away from the club, I think really that will allow us to push on. We want to keep climbing as high as we can. So we've just got to keep trying to find those little ways of improving.
I'm going to take you to dreamland now. if the owner walks in with a pot of cash and goes, Stuart, we want to really invest in sports science. We want to give you this pot of cash to go and purchase whatever kit you want, staff members, whatever it is. What would be maybe your top 3 in terms of priority?
I think without a doubt, I'd want a gym in place. And not anything fancy, a couple of squat racks.
No, you've got cash. You can have whatever you want.
I'm a very modest man, Ben. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have that. That's just a full gym setup where you walk in, you think, yeah, I know I'm here to train and work hard. I know I'm here to compete. I'm sure our physio would thank me if we could get a slightly better physio room as well. We work very closely together. We've brought in a new sports therapist as well. And I think that's ultimately going to help with a lot of the recovery and the pre-game preparations as well. So actually just having a little bit of a bigger space where we can all work together a little bit more closely rather than sort of climbing over each other to get through the door would be helpful. Yeah, and I think that I'd be happy with just that. But
go on, you got one more. You got one more.
One more. Go on, if we're throwing it in there, I'll take a couple of 4 stacks just because I've not had a huge amount of experience with them. So yeah, let's play around with them and see what I can learn from it.
And would that be just in terms of monitoring? Would that be looking at maybe some like sort of readiness or just testing in general?
I think all of the above, really. I know. Yeah. I saw a thing a while back that Rangers, I think it was, were doing a lot of hamstring eccentric stuff and like doing Nordics pre and post game to almost work out as their sort of fatigue index, if you like. And I've not had a huge amount of exposure to stuff like forward plate. So actually getting my hands on a new bit of kit where I can play around with it and learn more, and it's just another tool in the toolbox. I think that you've given me infinite money at this point. Yeah, great. let's go and have some fun with it.
4 stacks if you're listening. Free 4 stacks to Stuart, please. No, I think it's obviously it's a discussion that's up in the sky, isn't it? And it's all down to funds and financials and stuff. But I think it's important to discuss things like that as well, because it opens up your mind in terms of where the program could potentially go as well, doesn't it? And you as a practitioner have obviously put a hell of a lot into the program without that. And we've talked about priorities, and that has to, regardless of what club you're at and what situation you're in, there's always going to be priorities, isn't there, that you want within your program. But at the same time, a lot of coaches are always going to want something else and more as well.
Yeah. And if it's you're always looking for that fine margin, or that little thing that will get you over the line and help you beat any other team. And I think it's quite cyclical in that you watch any team who starts doing well, you start sort of copying their methods until some other team starts winning, and then you start copying their methods, and it's just a roundabout of the same ideas. But
yeah,
I mean, and certainly one of the interesting things I've noticed is that you've got it very much depends on the club, because you'll have some where it's the manager is quite happy, quite fixed in their ways, and they say, right, yeah, this is what we want to do. This is what we've done, and it always works. Let's stick to it. You've got your other managers who are a bit more like, okay, well, we've brought in this sports scientist, we've brought in an S&C coach. Let's give them the chance to sort of flourish with it. And I think, especially if you're a new practitioner and you're coming into it, having a manager that will give you that opportunity to try things is brilliant. Like, you couldn't ask for any more when you're trying to learn your craft and develop as a practitioner, really.
And you in that environment as well, because you'd have seen it at Notts County, that you still can test things out at that sort of level, but obviously there's a lot more at stake, isn't there, the higher you go up. So to be in that position, and I think it's for young coaches, maybe less experienced coaches, but also for other coaches as well, isn't it, to go and think, these are some things I would like to try and put in place. Non-league's perfect to go and test that out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's potentially high reward and potentially low risk.
Yeah.
Some of your players will be quite happy for the fact that you're just trying something new, that it's something that they've not been exposed to. Let's take the example. If we brought in a load of force decks, there'd instantly be a couple of players going, oh, what's this do then? Oh, okay, what can we do with this? How can I develop? How can I get better off it? So yeah, it's really go and get involved and get that experience. I think it's great to just test out new things, and it's try new drills. And if it doesn't work, okay, right, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's rethink that, and let's try it again next session. You've got that flexibility to be able to do that. Whereas if you've got a very structured sort of periodized program, you almost don't want to deviate too far away from it, and you might have to adapt to whatever your manager says in terms of, right, this game is suddenly much more important than we thought it was. Nothing can go wrong here, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think with what you mentioned about, I know we're using Force X as the example, but bringing a bit of kit in like that could potentially as well, players in that sort of part-time environment, it could potentially give them a little bit more feedback on taking more, I can't really think of the word, but putting more power in their court in terms of what they do away from the club as well, couldn't it? Because it's like, you're going to come in, you're going to get tested, we're going to have a look at readiness for you to perform, and what could you be doing to improve that? It's just like another data set to prove to players that you need to be doing this stuff, it's important, and you're ready to play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even with the GPS stuff now, after the game, you've usually got a few players who say, "Oh, are the stats up yet? Can I, who was taught? What did I do?"
Yeah.
And as a player and developing, if you've not been exposed to that before, you want to know how you're performing. How does that step up? Particularly if you're potentially in competition for a place, you want to know what you look like compared to the guys next to you. You're all a team, you're all working together, but let's be honest, you want to be a little bit selfish because you want to be in that starting lineup every week, don't you? So
100%, yeah.
A little bit more competition, especially I love it when we might be doing a warm-up, we might be doing a few races, and you've got players arguing over who's fastest, and you go, lads, I've got all the numbers up here, I know who's fastest. You can't argue with the data.
Brilliant. Stuart, that's some great insight, great information. I want to move on to the quick fire questions that we finished the podcast with. A little bit more around you and your career, starting with who've been some of the biggest influences on your career?
I was actually thinking about this on the train home, because it's one that it is quite a difficult question to answer, I think, because I've, again, coming from a sort of martial arts background, I've found a lot of that side of things very interesting, and I think you don't necessarily want to stick yourself in one sport, because you're already going to learn what those guys do.
Yeah.
So I'd say probably someone like James Langford, who used to be the S&C coach for GB Taekwondo. Some of the stuff he does, again, it seems very simple but very effective. Equally, I'd say probably more away from sport, but more in terms of just as a practitioner. Someone like Lane Norton is he's a nutritionist, powerlifter. He's got a very no nonsense approach to cutting through a lot of the myths and things that you see from, almost like fear mongering. Oh, this is the best supplement you'll see in the world. Yeah, actually, here's why it's not. Here's the research. I've read it.
Yeah.
And I think actually that helps you as a practitioner, because you are going to get players will come to you and say, oh yeah, well, I read about this, and what about this? And then it is learning how you communicate that to them. So yeah, more of a sort of personal or communication one. But yeah, I'd say probably he's up there as one of them. Yeah, that's probably what I'd go with.
No, it is a tough one, isn't it, to narrow it down to just a few people. In terms of your biggest strength as a practitioner, what would you say that is?
I'm very much a sort of feedback open door policy. So after a session, I always want to know immediately, what do my athletes think of it? And equally, if my athletes are running through a session, I want them to give me feedback as well. Could I have communicated that differently? Could we have changed this? Like, what didn't you like about this? I want that to work both ways. As a coach, you're always looking to provide either a cue or a feedback, or, some players, if they're doing well, great, feed that back to them. If they need to improve something, great, feed that back to them. But I think it's got to work both ways with a coach as well, because if you've not got somebody calling out you on your own job, you need that feedback to work both ways. So I'm saying that's probably, I'm very open as a listener. I'm very open to feedback on how are we doing, basically.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. If you were to give advice to a younger Stuart, career advice, that is.
I was going to say, there's definitely some things there.
We will leave the personal side out of it, but career advice, what would that be?
I'd probably just relax. Just relax. It's all going to work itself out. You do trust in yourself and just go and create those opportunities. If you, particularly in an industry that's as competitive as this, you're going to get a lot of disappointment with, you got close to this job but not quite, or you never heard back from this, or you've applied for it. Take your time, relax, go and create your own opportunities. Go and look for those other opportunities that are going to make you better. And if they're not available, you're going to make them yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Not just for yourself, but for other people as well. This is an interesting one that I always like to ask in terms of CPD and your approach right now. So you as a practitioner continually improving and developing, how do you go about that in terms of like what resources do you use? Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be courses. It could be courses. What sort of things do you look at?
I think anything and everything. I'm very much someone who just loves learning. As soon as you give me a new topic, I want to know all about it. As soon as I hear somebody else talking about a topic, it makes me think, oh, actually, I know nothing. I need to go learn about this now. So, CPD is a massive one for me. And at the minute, sort of juggling a few different roles, it might be a case of, when I went to lacrosse, for example, it's let's look at the research. What does that say? What does the game look like? Let's watch footage. What does the game look like? What are the common challenges? What are the demands? What does the player need to do? I think, don't be afraid to look around multiple sources for CPD. And some of them are going to be very, let's say, probably not traditional in a way. Like, you might jump on Instagram or social media, you might go to a networking event, and just chatting to people, you'll come up with ideas. You'll find new bits and pieces that it's a little bit more interesting when you learn from somebody else's experience, rather than just reading journal after journal or magazine or newspaper. Or, I think, yeah, don't be afraid to sort of cast your net wide and just have a look at things that interest you. Even if they're far removed from a sport field, there's probably still something in there you can bring into your own practice. One of the books I always recommend to people is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Nothing to do with sport, but great to do with development as a person, great to develop some of that buy-in and actually get a player to follow a program. How do you build that habit? It's something that you're not really going to get taught on a uni course, but it's something that is massively applicable to what you do as a practitioner.
Just to add on to that, in terms of when you are, I'm thinking more social media now. I suppose with certain books as well, because Atomic Habits has got to be in my top three. Definitely in my top three. So definitely recommend people to read it if you've not read it. But in terms of I can't think of any other way of describing it apart from a bullshit meter when you are going through information, especially on socials, but even in books and resources. How do you keep a critical approach? And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. I just mean that when you read something, you're not just believing everything, you're sort of critically analysing it and taking what you then can from it.
I think as any coach, you'll you'll naturally want to gravitate to stuff that you agree with because it sort of reinforces your own biases, which is why I think it's almost more important to go and read something that you don't agree with at all, or something you know nothing about, because it's going to challenge what you already know.
Yeah.
And then actually you start to, the more you read about it, the more well-rounded that opinion becomes, and actually you become better at defending your own practice. You'll see a couple of coaches who will say things like, "Oh, well, why have you got that exercise in your program?" So, well, you then need to think about it, and it can't just be, "Oh, well, I like squats." It's like, think a little bit more broadly about it. Okay, well, this person doesn't barbell back squat. What else can you do? Why wouldn't you do this instead? And it just makes you think a little bit more as a practitioner. It's not you're not challenging someone to be difficult. You're challenging them to test them and see, do they actually know their stuff? Let's filter through that bullshit beat.
Yeah, no, love that. Love that answer. Stuart, that's brilliant, mate. Really, really good. I hope you enjoyed coming on and discussing that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that take a lot from it, because we get a fair few messages from people talking about the episodes with coaches in non-league. I think it's very, like I said before, very applicable to a lot of people. If people want to reach out and they maybe want to jump on any part of this conversation and extend it further with yourself, where would you direct them?
Probably say my Twitter I'm most responsive on. That's S_Britton24. Drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll always reply to that. I'm trying to get a bit better with Instagram, but it's never been my sort of thing to brag about things. So Strength Coach Stu is probably the one on that to go for.
Perfect, mate. And what day is the final?
Sunday, the 21st of May, Wembley Stadium. Non-league finals day, FA Vars followed by the FA Trophy.
Amazing. Everyone listening, make sure you're supporting Ascot. Look out for Stuart on telly. Hopefully celebrate. Tickets are available. There you go. You have a full stadium now, mate, after that.
I hope so, yeah.
No, all the best for it, mate. Well, first of all, congratulations on the season so far, but also all the best in the final. And keep up the great work.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Ben. Thanks for having me on.